This is a Founding Media podcast.
Howdy, and welcome back to Season 1 of Vibe Austin. I'm your host, Mark, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dan.
Hey, y'all.
You know, this season of Vibe Austin, we're talking all about our amazing music and art scene, and we wouldn't be doing Austin justice if we didn't pay our respects to some of the people and places that built up this music-loving city. Our guest today is here to share stories about Austin's music scene before the tech boom. You know, back when Rosedale was in North Austin.
We're super excited to welcome Jack Yoder to the show today. Jack was the man behind the scenes for Willie Nelson, his production manager for many years. He's old school Austinite and lifelong music enthusiast. Jack has lived in Austin since 1978, and we're so excited to hear his stories about how Austin was back before many of us can call ourselves residents. We hope that by sharing these stories, we can better understand our history and preserve the great community of creatives and art enthusiasts that we will have here in Austin. But before we talk about Jack, let's remember to thank our sponsors: Austin Title, Vista Lending, House of Strube, and Nest Financial for helping us spread Austin's vibe and history. You can learn more about these businesses and how to support them in our show notes. And now, let's welcome Jack Yoders onto episode 5 of Vibe Austin.
Say you wanna know how deep my love is. You say you long to hear those words of mine. So I ask, how deep is the ocean? How deep is the color in your eye? A simple glance, your eyes are mine, and I lose my breath and move and wonder. My words fall flat in all my lines until the tide pulls me under. You say you wanna know how deep my love is. You say you long to hear those words of mine. So I ask, how deep is the ocean? How deep is the color in your eye?
Awesome. We are so excited to start this conversation. With us today is Jack Yoder, and it's incredible. Incredible. I just want to hear some of the stories. Tell us a little bit about, he's production manager for Willie Nelson, but also just around music all your life, around Austin for a long time. So just to get started, to help the audience know a little bit about you, how'd you get to Austin?
Well, I've been a music fan my whole life. I lived 90 miles from Chicago when I was up in the Midwest. And Willie Nelson, that was back in the outlaw era, was playing Chicago, and I thought that'd be a great opportunity to go.
Mm-hmm.
And two of his road guys and Willie, which I didn't expect, came out after the show to talk, and I was just floored, yeah. So we started talking about what happened and what's happening in Austin. He says, if you get a chance, you should come down. And I'm thinking, well, it's just nice conversation, you know. And the more he talked, I said, well, if I had somebody down there to show me around. And he says, well, I've got a secretary at the Austin Opera House. She could pick you up at the airport. And I said, okay.
Nice.
So we did that, and I came down. And
what year was that, Morris?
78.
Yeah.
And she took me all around. This is when Willie still had his apartment houses, which have been replaced now.
Okay.
And there was a chili cook-off, which were big back then, out at Maynard Downs. And she said, if you haven't been to one of those, we need to go. And I asked, well, is there any musical entertainment? And she said, there probably will be. And we went out there. It was Charlie Daniels. They considered him local entertainment.
Nice.
Chili cook-off.
And
Nice.
and we came back. She showed me around the apartment complex. And she says, well, it's too bad you're not staying because there's one apartment open next to Willie's.
Oh, man.
Oh,
And
wow.
I said, drop the papers. And I flew back and moved down there a week later
That's awesome.
Wow.
in '78 and haven't.
You just saw that. You just recognized that opportunity. You're like, I just need to.
Well,
Be there.
it just seemed right. I mean, Ray Benson, asleep at the wheel, had an apartment, called it the Horseshoe,
Yeah.
which followed around the Opera House.
Yeah.
And there was Steve Fromholtz, Michael Martin Murphy, depending on which couch he selected, he was always there. Willie had his own apartment. Rusty Weir had one.
Okay.
So, I mean,
Sounds like just
Sounds
fun
like
times.
sounds like a hippie cowboy version of Melrose Place right there.
Right.
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, I
And,
like it. I'll take that over Melrose anyway.
So
But
I
how
put-
many people can say I was personally invited to Austin by Willie Nelson? I mean, basically, he rolled out the red carpet and said, "Come on, check us out."
Well, at the time, I really thought it was polite conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about him. Honestly, I loved his music, but had never met him and never
Yeah.
knew of him, knew who he was or knew what he was. And that old saying of what you see is what you get is pretty much Willie off and on stage. You get treated the same as if he's at the White House. He
Yeah.
doesn't treat them any different than he treats you. So
Nice.
that's a pretty good deal in my case.
That's amazing.
Worked out.
So you continuing with the stories, I think this is fascinating for people to learn. You moved to Austin. You were, a neighbor, and then what else, happened as far as how did you get involved with working with Willie?
His partner, or his best friend, also his partner, was a golf pro that ran the golf course for Willie. And back then, even though they had a booking agent, they liked to do their own shows for obvious reasons. They made more money if they did it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And Willie's partner hired me, and we go off in a car and follow the route and set the shows up and
Nice.
chase the promoters when they didn't want to pay. And there's a couple times where, I won't say where, but it was in
Right.
Central Texas that the promoter didn't do very well, and his intention was not to pay a dime.
Wow.
And because it was such a small, good old boy town, when I went up to collect, he had police all around him. So I thought, well, that's a losing battle. So I went back and told Paul English that I was having a little problem getting paid. So Paul went up with me. And then I turned around, there's Willie, and they said, "Well, so where is the promoter?" And I looked up, and he's in his Cadillac going down the fence line. So there's three of us chasing him all the way to the fence line. Got our money, though.
Nice. Good
That's
job.
funny.
Yeah.
I mean, just to know how that worked.
How
is
close?
back then,
Yeah. Just
It is
boots
the
on
Wild
ground.
Wild West.
Yeah. Willie's braided pigtails there flapping in the wind, chasing
And,
after a
and if you
Cadillac.
have anybody on your side, you want Paul English on your side.
Nice.
So-
Nice.
but it was Willie was my introduction into Texas music and the Austin vibe, like you say.
Yeah.
He talked Waylon into coming down here. He didn't really talk him into it. He told him he was coming down.
Nice.
But Willie was sold on it. He had enough of Nashville.
Yeah.
He had enough of being told how to do things. And he came down here and started doing it his own way. And obviously it worked out for him.
Yeah.
But I was happy to be a part of it.
What are some of the fun experiences that you can share about, things here in Austin that you've done, or, just because you also managed some of the picnics, and I mean, talk a little bit more about what you
Well,
your role
Willie's picnics, I'm trying to think, there's one he had out at his golf course.
Yeah.
And I did what they call the production management. And that was designing and executing the physical end of it, making sure that crews did what they were supposed to do and talked to all the artists and schedule them and hire some. Of course, even the ones I'd hire, it was because Willie said to hire them. There wasn't a person on that bill that he didn't personally invite. So I got involved, I think because I did the family shows, promotions with them, I kind of automatically got drafted into the picnic, which was fantastic for me. A lot of produced Aquafest for 1 year, and that was in '93.
What was that like?
It was kind of like 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag because they wanted a lot but didn't want to give you the property to put it on, which is down in Auditorium Shores. But it was a mainstay for a lot of people like to go out and take their families out. And it just ran its course, I think. People moved on to other things.
Get to meet a lot. I imagine just in our conversation earlier, you got to meet a lot of musicians throughout your career, just different artists that could come in. And
quite a few, a lot of them here. What you would consider local would be like Stevie Ray Vaughan. When I first moved to Austin, I went down, drove downtown to get acclimated, and this, what I call a kid, was hitchhiking, looked fairly decent. And I thought, well, I'll give him a ride. He's probably a college kid. And we started talking music, and he talked music like I've never heard before, and his name is Junior Medlow. Who's not, I don't believe he's with us anymore. But he says, if you want to get to know Austin music, he said, go down to the Rome Inn. He said, there's a kid playing down there. I said, well, how much will it cost? And he said, it'll probably only cost you $1. That was in '78.
Wow.
So I went down there and walked in. It was Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Oh, wow.
I paid to see it for $1. And I don't remember the owner, but the owner, it just got so busy. He got tired. He couldn't go the course, and he just threw Stevie the keys and said, lock up when you're done. So we had coffee at daylight.
Nice.
And it was great. Those were the Austin vibe days for me.
Well,
anyway.
the start, for sure. I mean, I think the vibe just evolves, but for sure, there's a lot of foundation.
For sure. I mean, your vibe started in '78 because you got here in '78. Mine started in 2000. And I caught a good ride from 2000 forward, and it was about a festival that was very approachable, attainable, not overpriced. It was about Ray Wiley Hubbard playing at the Rose. What's the club? It's escaping my name right now. But man, just small, just little tiny venues, and it was the local talent.
A lot of them that are have moved up the chain, so to speak. Still like to play those clubs.
Yeah. That's because you come home to Austin. There's probably nowhere like it, right? The music fan, just the super fan.
You go out to LA, which is certainly different. I look forward to being there, but I look forward to leaving.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, if you ask them about Austin, everybody knows about it.
Right.
They know about Eeyore's birthday party, which was culture shocking if you went to it for the first time.
You hear about it, you think you take your kids or something, and then you
maybe not.
Maybe not. Maybe in like the first part of the day, but you better get out of there by lunchtime.
Yeah, it was interesting. I could see it progress as the time went on in the evening,
Yeah.
But there was a lot of things that set the standard or set the mood for Austin, and Armadillo World Headquarters. Eddie Wilson. Bruce Springsteen would play Armadillo. Elvis Presley, I think, played it once.
Wow.
The lawyers would come in, and the hippies would come in, and they'd say, well, come on down. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound like a very good mix.
Right.
But you go down there, and they're all buying each other drinks and having a good time.
Wow.
And all they paid attention to is the actual music.
Yeah.
And That's when Willie moved back, when all that was going on.
Yeah.
Nice.
It was
Now you had music in your history before you met Will.
yeah. My grandmother. Should I say my age on here?
Sure, why not?
75.
Okay.
So my grandmother's passed, but she was a piano player for the silent movies.
Oh, nice.
They would have the kind of the U-Haul truck
Uh-huh.
and have the movie screen and her piano in there.
Wow.
And the first night when they would play the movie, she would have to watch the movie. And you know what cue marks are on the screen. It'll show you. Back then it used to be, well, it's time to put the next reel on.
Right.
So she would know something else is coming up. But after the first night, she didn't even have to look.
Yeah.
And that was that was her idea of touring.
Yeah.
My aunt was a chorus girl for Ziegfeld Follies back in the 30s and
Wow.
40s. So when they'd fly home to my grandmother's for Christmas,
Yeah.
we just drove them crazy. Because we'd tell the war stories, and the road stories. And my mother played for Pee Wee King for a brief time.
Okay.
And then she had me, and that kind of put a stop to her professional career. So
Nice.
that came up in conversation quite a bit
Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah.
But that was the beginning for me, and my grandmother really thought I should get a day job. She said, it's nice you love music, but get a day job. But she saw me on TV one night, and all of a sudden it kind of made sense.
Yeah.
She just couldn't figure out why anybody would want me on TV. But she supported me after
Awesome.
she realized I wasn't going to move on to something else
Yeah.
the week after. So that's kind of a brief background on it. I didn't have the discipline like the guitar players do, or the harmonica players. I didn't have the discipline to follow through and rehearse and everything, and I didn't want to not be out of the business because of that. And I picked this up. Somebody called me in 1970, and I went to work with Fleetwood Mac.
Wow.
And they kept asking me, well, can you do this, and this? And I said, oh, absolutely.
Always say yes.
And then I'd rush and start making phone calls to find out what that meant.
Yeah. Well, that actually interests me, and I'm sure so many listeners, right, is that what is this, and this? Like your role. It's integral, and it's so. I mean, the musicians couldn't do what they do without you doing what you do. But tell us what that is. I mean, in a nutshell.
Well, for a production management position, let's say when I was out with Julio Iglesias, my job was when I got what they call white sheets from the booking agents to tell me where we were going and what time and all the contact information, I would call ahead, hopefully and get 2 or 3 weeks worth of advance work done, and let the promoters what we needed for our show, crew-wise, light-wise, if we didn't carry our own. Everything from catering to security. And then once we got there, it was my job to make sure they followed through with what they agreed to. So it wasn't a bad job. It was, for me, it was more time-consuming than manual labor.
Yeah. Right.
But I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I mean,
organization
you enjoy the first 2 weeks, and after that it becomes a job.
Yeah,
But the first 2 weeks are always interesting because it's all new.
Right. And it's old news. But yeah, you lay the groundwork so the musicians come in and breeze in and do what they do best, but it wouldn't happen without you.
Julio made a great analogy once. He said, well, he was having trouble. He can never hear things the same way twice, even though it could be the same way twice.
Yeah.
It wouldn't sound that way to him. And he just got me on stage one night and said, if I told you that car you're driving was going to wreck on the next turn, would you get in it? And I said, no, I don't believe so. So you're expecting me to go on this stage tonight, right? No. He didn't want his stage direct, so we had to make amends, you know. But he had a way of
being eloquent about it.
being eloquent, diplomatic.
Charmer that he is, yeah.
Some of the fun stories that you were sharing with me the other day, I really loved one that you were talking about Stevie in his early days being
I'm sorry?
Stevie Ray Vaughan being in his early days being introducing to shows, and so some of those experiences.
Well, we had talked already about George Thorogood. Did we talk about that already?
We haven't.
I'm sorry.
No, we haven't. We were talking before the show.
Yeah. I ran the Opera House for a while, leased it from William, and had George Thorogood going to play that night. And Stevie Ray called me up and asked, well, I'm a little nervous about the show.
Yeah.
Would you mind if I came down and rehearsed on the stage that I'm going to play on? I said, no, nobody's here yet. Come on down. And a little while later, I thought, well, I probably ought to stop him by now. And I go in the venue, and here's George standing there watching Stevie play. And he turned around and he said, who is this guy? And I said, that's your opening act. And I've never seen a guy just go from high to low and nothing flat. And he said, oh, I won't repeat what he said. But
Yeah.
so he was more nervous than Stevie was.
I bet. I was going to ask you, was that at that point you'd seen Stevie play? I mean, I would imagine, I mean, when he calls you up, tells you he's nervous, is that just kind of mind-boggling? It would seem, you know.
Well, it was a time where, like I say, you go from Rome Inn at $1 to Steamboat Springs, which was on 6th Street, for $5. Of course, that was outlandish to locals at $5.
I'm not paying that.
But you're making 5 times the money you were making before. So that's,
yeah. And then you get to the Opera House and it's $15, so people are beside themselves. So he feels like they expect more.
I see.
Yeah.
I think George, if I remember right, ended up taking Stevie with him and opening some dates out in California.
Nice.
They ended up being good friends.
Yeah, good call. Good choice.
But I loved the look in his face. He said, let me know about a minute or two before Stevie's done. And he sat in the dressing room off stage left to where he could see me the whole time. So I turned around and looked and just gave him 2. And he grabbed his guitar. Usually I cue him to put him on. And he came streaking by me, screaming and yelling, and jumped on stage and started playing. He just, he was a wreck.
Yeah.
He was a wreck. I loved every minute of it. We had a local that took over. So.
That was really cool.
So,
one thing I wanted to ask you, like going back a little ways, you talked about Waylon coming here from Nashville, and, you know, probably a lot of people who did. And I've heard it contrasted, you know, Nashville music scene, Austin music scene. Nashville's real buttoned up studio. It's about production. It's about, you know, and Austin's about playing out and collaborating. And it's just more of there's an Austin vibe, right, in the music scene. Would you agree with that?
I think so. I don't know Nashville that well.
Yeah.
I know people that tell me about it, so I'm happy being here.
Yeah.
But I agree with what you said, that it's more a collaborative effort down here. It's not a competition.
There you go.
Down here.
Yeah.
We all don't have to look alike.
Right.
We don't have to dress alike to be a success. Freddie Fletcher, who is Willie's nephew, Bobby Nelson's son, has studios, and Freddie won't say it in public, but he does anything he can to help. When I managed a couple artists, he said, just bring them out and close up when you're done. You can use the studio. So, I mean, it's a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
Nobody's out to, I can do better than him.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's a good band or a good act, they want to help.
They'll say so.
Sometimes they just need to step up, not a, you know, you don't need a record label anymore. I mean, you can do a studio quality recording in a room smaller than this.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was,
One of the things that I admired is when we were talking the other day about some of these experiences and recognizing that the vibe that we see today, which is still this community, which is, and it is translated into business and other things. I mean, I can pretty much call anybody that I don't know and say, hey, I want to grab coffee. I heard good things about you. And for the most part, they're like, yeah, let's go do it. And to understand and unpack that and to say that vibe started a long time ago, or it has evolved from things, and a lot of it is attributed to musicians and how cool musicians are with each other and how they respect each other and play with each other. And there's something beautiful about music that just kind of brings people together. So I put those two things together when you and I were talking the other day.
Well, that's true. It has evolved, and maybe for some of us old timers, we're not as quick to recognize that.
Yeah.
But it's good that it's here. The Austin vibe hasn't gone away. It's like you said the other day, that it's evolved and it's built itself up in a little maybe different direction.
Yeah.
The political community's getting a little more receptive to it again.
Right.
Ernie Gamage, people like that, helped get the live music capital put on city stationery, you know. And South by Southwest comes along and proves that music is big numbers in Austin. And I think it probably still is, but just in a different way.
100%.
So,
Well, one of the things that really impacted me of our conversation the other day is this Armadillo venue that you were talking, just mentioned a second ago, where it was, you know, country music and hippies together, and I think Willie coined that, but just the vibe behind that, like just being able to be, there's no difference. It's just all music and we're all having fun.
Yeah.
So
well, it was the same way at Willie's Picnics.
Yeah.
That when you heard that bikers would be there and lawyers and hippies, you'd think, well, I'm not sure I want to go.
Yeah.
But there was rarely, if you go by statistics, have 15, 20,000 people and have one or two incidents.
Wow.
That's a pretty good
Yeah.
statistic to have.
Yeah.
So it's and it's all up to the artists, I think, how they take care of the people that paid to see them.
Right.
It's got artists now, not in Austin, but that incite the crowds.
Right. Yeah.
And I think most of the Austin musicians are more appreciative of the people that are there.
Yeah.
I certainly feel like it's more of I'm a music fan too, so thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. And look, here we are, you know, this time of year, we're looking at Austin City Limits Music Festival, and that's a good example of that mixed array. You're going to get, I mean, I go and I don't know which stage to look at because it's country over here and hip hop over here, and that started music, here a long time ago, right? Yeah. So it's neat that we can have all that differentiation in one festival, and it works really well.
Well, it was a heck of a concept when they put it together, because one of the partners, before they sold it to Live Nation, one of the partners now still runs Stubbs. Another partner, I think, had his own company. And I don't honestly know the third one, but they were local guys, so they had their finger on the pulse, and they knew what would work and what would not work.
Yeah.
And you're seeing it more now. I mean, it was a template. This is, what are we at now? 20 plus years of this festival.
Has it been that much?
Yeah. I remember.
Yeah.
I was working at the Texas Music Cafe in those early days. I was an opening crew at there on South Congress, and I remember this new festival in Austin and being described. People couldn't wait to go, and I was familiar with the TV show, which was also an amazing institution in and of itself. But I was like, oh, there's a festival? I grew up going to things that were very homogenous. The Warped Tour was all going to be pop punk. Lollapalooza was all going to be rock. So it was really cool. It's a cool concept, and I'm super proud of it. That it was so good that now we have it for 2 weekends a year. But yeah, it's a very Austin type of vibe to
and
be
all
so
downtown
eclectic.
pretty much is like traffic for those 2 weekends.
Oh, yeah.
I live right around that corner.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, okay, for those 2 weekends, I'm doing house projects.
Sure. Yeah, it's true. We embrace that part of it too. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, welcome to Austin.
Yeah.
We're good. I understand. You want to be here too. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny that when you do have ACL or South by, there's such an influx. You think the town's going to explode,
Right.
but a week later,
It's back to normal.
after what you've witnessed, it looks like a ghost town the week later.
I mean,
It seems like
comparatively,
where'd
yeah.
all the people go.
It's also a funny ruse that we do it in. We do South by in March and we do ACL in October. Best months of weather, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a real estate guy. It's like our trick, right? We're going to bring you here to town and we're going to show you this weather. And then everybody falls in love with the city, and they say, "Oh, I'm going to live in Austin." So works out well. It's part of the evolution of the city is that we are growing. You mentioned traffic. There's the growing pains. Having been here for so long, like what do you feel like are some of those growing pains, or do you have any concerns about this growth?
Well, I think Broken Spoke's a good example
Yeah,
because they're in one
Oh,
spot
man.
and there's nothing but development
it's
all the way
interesting,
around
isn't it? But thank God they're still right there.
And James, who's passed on, I think was responsible for that. If you knew James, you knew he didn't listen to too much he didn't like.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know who's running now, but maybe his wife is.
Yeah.
But I hope some of these places you just shouldn't attribute to progress.
Right.
I think some things you should keep.
Yeah. Oh,
It's haven't seen one happen yet. I think maybe Broken Spoke is about the only one that sticks out that's
Yeah.
really been around for.
What about like, I guess Antone's has moved around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seaboys has been around. Have they moved around, or has that been around for that long? I know
I
there's
don't
a
know
few
that
venues.
much about them,
Okay.
but you're right about Antone's.
Yeah.
When I moved here, they were just leaving 6th Street.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I caught him at 5th.
Yeah.
There
That
you
was
go.
the fifth. I would mount for Milligan,
Yeah.
that time period, right?
It's a place across from Seaboys on the same strip. I'm trying to think now. Another venue that I'm trying to
Yeah.
drawing a blank, but it's been there for a long time.
I think Steamboat's shut down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's these things that they're iconic, and that's part of the welcoming of growth in Austin. It's like it's a two-edged sword. It's like there's great people coming in, but there's also things. I mean, it's a complex problem because there's only so much space, and there's
Well, some of the development companies do recognize
Yeah.
the uniqueness of Austin
Right.
and try to integrate
Yep.
that in their plan,
Yeah.
which I give them a lot of credit for. I
Well,
don't
sure.
know if they explain that to their investors the same
yeah.
way.
It's got to monetize, but when we
Yeah.
recognize that there's a quality of life in this intrinsic Austininness that does translate, such as heritage oak trees. Don't cut them down; they have value. It's keeping things that are Austin is why Austin wants to be here, right? So if you just clear cut the city and start putting up everything that is the same as Chicago, LA, New York, that's what we're afraid of. That's what I'm afraid of, and that's part of why Dan and I like to sit here and talk about Austin like we do.
Well,
There's so
it's-
much to preserve.
Plenty of people like to critique Austin and say what's wrong with it, or they let this shut down, or no, you let it shut down.
Yeah, good point.
Because it's easy to sit home and armchair everything that's going on.
Yeah.
If you don't get involved, then you're part of the problem, not
solution.
It's
Part of the
a
solution.
I can't believe X shut down. Well, when's the last time you went there? You
Right.
know?
Whoops.
Yeah. Whoops. It's like, yeah, so yeah.
It was, of course, the backstage was Willie's, and that was on the corner of Academy and
Oh yeah.
Congress,
Oh man, yeah.
and everybody
Look what's
was
there now.
Not there now.
Not there now. It's a
Brand
lot
new
different.
apartments.
It's a lot different, yeah.
But that's where everybody would go when, I think you and I talked about that, where everybody would go when they're off the road. They would go to the backstage to find out what was going on.
Nice.
It was a unsaid meeting place, where Townes Van Zandt would be Monday entertainment, and
Wow.
Little local talent again.
local talent.
Yeah.
Jerry Diff Walker, considered to be local talent. Blaze Foley, Stevie Ray, Storyville,
Yeah.
Marsha Ball.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, I'm more prone to the blues and rock side, but Thunderbirds, even though they were from all over the country, that everybody from Austin claimed them to be Austin citizens, They would do a thing called Riverfest right down in Auditorium, when it was called Auditorium Shores.
Yeah.
Do that every year, and people, it was attended just as well as ACL was, except Riverfest is just one night.
Yeah.
So, and you never knew who they invited. They just say, and guess.
Oh, wow.
And you'd see Robert Cray one year, or you'd see Bonnie Raitt. And they didn't get what they're used to getting. They liked being in Austin.
Yeah.
Bonnie's played Saxon Pub.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking about. Is
Yeah.
Saxon still around?
Saxon's going strong.
Yeah. It's good, yeah.
So it's speaking of mainstays, Saxon Pub's been around a long time. And
Yeah. Long live.
Joe Abels is fighting to stay where he's at because
It's a hot spot.
it's a hot
Yeah,
spot,
it is,
and the real estate's catching up with him on South Lamar, but so far it seems to.
Yeah. Well, it's a good reminder to go and get there, buy some beers.
Go
and
and,
keep it
go
there.
and get there. And also, just to kind of point out, some of these venues do start moving, and they move to different locations because of the cost and whatnot. But it's still there. Yeah.
Emo's was, that location there. Emo's is a great club.
That's true.
Some of my first days in Austin were spent at Emo's, and they moved.
But the
They're
vibe's
still there. They're
The vibe's
keeping
still
it
there.
going.
Yeah. Some of those places, I guess, on the south part of not Congress, but South Austin. There's a bunch of acreage out there where there's live music outside.
Yeah, we're pushing a little bit out of the core. But as long as there's demand for live music, we'll find a place to play it. So as long as there's a demand, which we'll keep alive here, it's part of the fabric of Austin, right? Yeah.
Well, so much that I'm getting from this conversation, but most of it just sounds just like this community love for music, love for the arts, love to help and support one another, and that does translate into the vibe. And so I'm really, and also the pride of Austin, right? Because there's all
There's
this
a lot of pride.
There's a lot of pride because of all the talent that's here,
and people recognize that finally. I couldn't think of the year it started, but they developed HAM,
right?
Yeah.
medical assistance for musicians and related
Support.
people in the industry, and
Yeah, I mean that was late '90s. I mean it's it's these
and the
things are going
musicians
strong
are starting
today.
to realize their value. They weren't sure they had any before. So.
Yeah, a couple of shows ago, we had Black Fred on, which is a non-profit that is supporting musicians. So you have all this people that just love the music, love the arts and music, and how do we support it, and how do we get out there and continue to make this great city develop new music?
Well, most of the ones that you saw when you first moved here and I first moved here, unfortunately, are gone, but there's new ones kind of taking their place in a way. The Scoot Inn is one, and I can't think of Ray Benson's place, the name of it.
Well, if we ever have him on the show, we'll make sure to tell him that you didn't remember his name, the name of the place. He will never let you live that down.
If you got a mute switch,
right?
I'll back it up.
The buddy of mine went on a cruise with the Outlaw Cruise.
Oh, nice.
And Ray was on that with us. And my friend says, I told him, I said, well, tell Ray that I said hello. And he said, anything special you want me to tell him? I said, well, yeah, actually. I said, when you go up and see see him, I said, shake hands, tell him I said hello, and tell him you got something for him. Go like this. And I guess Ray's 6'8".
Yeah.
Every bit of it turned red. He just went head to toe, he turned red.
Awesome.
So Ray's the first friend I had when I moved to Austin. He's the one that reached out and said, well, you can't drink whiskey at the backstage alone.
Yeah.
So here he and I went walking down Academy Drive to the backstage, and I shouldn't tell the listeners in the middle of the day, but it was in the middle of the day.
Yeah, well, I mean, but what I hear from that though is not the whole middle of the day part. It's the reach out. It's the make you feel at home, right? And so even whenever the invitation to come down to Austin, a place, and they show you around, all these things just like make you feel really welcome.
It's a common thread. It's a completely tying thread through all of these conversations we're having about Austin. We just want to continue to highlight that. It was that way in '78, and I find it that way today. And we want to make sure it stays that way, and it's up to us.
I had a experience, had an Uber driver maybe a year ago that from out of the country came in, and I just like to chat with the Uber drivers, and he was having kind of a bad day, and he moved in recently, and something had happened where he had an incident earlier that day, and he was upset about him moving a TV out, and the lady was griping at the parking space that he was taking, and he's like, "It's my first day to Austin." I'm like, "Sorry about that experience. Let's go and have a beer." And so we scheduled time the week after, and we went and had a little happy hour together because I wanted to show him what Austin community is like. Yeah. And we've become really good friends ever since.
Oh, look at that.
It's just, but that's part of like the pride. Yeah. It's like you want to, if there's a bad experience, how do we make that better?
Normally, if you can turn that around.
Yeah.
If you take a deep breath. When I was 20, I didn't let it turn around. But I got a little smarter as I got older. Not completely, but
funny how wisdom creeps up on you.
It is, isn't it? What's that saying they talk about? Well, I didn't think my dad had an ounce of sense in his head, but when I turned 25, I was amazed at how much he'd learned.
I had not heard that. That's good. I like that.
Yeah, that was something else. My dad was just mean as nails, and I thought every bit of advice he gave me was the most silly, stupid advice I ever had in my life. And then, like I say, when he was 25, I was just amazed how much he'd learned in that period of time.
So quickly. So it happens when we get older. So you were telling me about a fun story with Bonnie Raitt and some of the tour that she had. You want to share that?
Well, I had mentioned Thunderbirds had their annual River Fest, and that was Jimmy Vaughn was in on it, and if Stevie was in town, he'd be there, and Robert Cray from Houston would come, and Bonnie Raitt would be there, and Bonnie, even though I don't know where she lives now, but everybody claimed her as well.
Yeah.
And I went to get her and walked her up on stage, and she handed me a note of paper, and she said, "Oh, I forgot to give you this." And she just smiled at me and put it in my hand, and I looked up and said, "Do you want to have a beer with Lois Lane?" And I knew where Bonnie's trailer was, and I didn't flash on it right away.
Yeah.
So I went to the trailer. I mean, you don't learn anything unless you look, right? And it was Margot Kidder.
Okay. Who is Lois Lane?
Who is Lois Lane in all some of the Superman movies. So that was kind of my Lois Lane. So we sat down and had a beer. And that was kind of fun. I enjoyed that.
And I bet you felt like Superman.
Okay. We can go with that.
It was a great story. I mean, some of these stories, like, who else can say that? I've had a beer with Lois Lane.
Sure.
Or,
Or that Bonnie Raitt would hand you a little note and get a kick out of it. I mean,
Stevie Ray Vaughan, asked to be on the stage.
I mean, Jack, you're just so close to these stories, you don't realize how interesting they are. But
I hate to say it, but more will probably come up while I'm driving home.
There you go.
Should I tell my...
Sure. I don't even know what it is. Sure, go for it.
Okay. Monkees made their big comeback in 1986. That was a big year for them. I mean, they beat the Beatles in sales that year.
Wow.
And, I mean, they were number one. And the man that produced their tours had experience. He was initially a sports manager, and he managed, he would promote nostalgia tours. So he kind of equated that to a nostalgia tour. He got them RVs to ride in, you know, and things like that. And then he realized it was more than a nostalgia tour. So he called me up to come out and organize the show. And the first show, and naturally now that I'm talking about it, I can't think of the name of the venue, but it was in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And first show with the Monkees, I hadn't met anybody yet. I was first one on the outdoor venue. And in each venue you go to, it's the obligation of the promoter to provide me an office to work out of.
Okay.
And to give you your listeners a little background, that is a strong union area. It's Local 1, which is out in New York City. If they tell you to jump, you just got to wait until they figure out how high. And so I went in my office, figured I'd just keep to myself. And the union steward came in, just white as a sheet, and he said, "There's somebody out in the parking lot that wants to talk to you." And traditionally, when you're doing a show, the closer it gets to showtime, everybody wants to talk to you. So you just try to triage that. And then in the middle of the afternoon, I said, "Well, can't you take care of it?" He said, "No, I don't think I better." And I says, "Well, I just got here. It's my first day with the Monkees. I don't think I should take the time." And he said, "They asked for you by name." And I'm thinking, well, nobody else knows I'm coming out here but the promoters. So I said, "All right, I'll go out." And I walked out, and I saw at the corner of the venue, it was Jones Beach. That's where it was.
Oh, yeah.
And I look in the corner of the venue, and there's this long stretch black limousine, and there were 5 guys in it. And the closer I got, there were 2 in front and 3 in the back, and the guy in the middle of the back seat was all dressed in white. And the guy that was on my side of the back seat didn't have a neck. I don't think he had a shirt collar. He didn't have a neck. He was just, and he rolled the window down. He started telling me why they're there. And the man in the middle said, "I can take care of this." And he called me by name. He had his white walking cane and his derby, and he said, "I'd appreciate a personal favor if you would take care of my family tonight." And he leaned forward, and it was John Gotti. And I'm thinking, well, to myself, I don't think no should be in any of the conversations, you know. But I had a family to support.
Yeah.
And I was worried about if they saw him backstage, they wouldn't know his family, but him, that I'd probably be on the next plane.
Yeah.
And I told him that. I look back on it, I probably shouldn't have said anything, but I asked him if I could speak in front of his security.
Yeah.
He said, "Sure." And I said, "Sir, whatever you want, I'll get for you, but if they see you backstage," I said, "I'll get fired." And he just looked at me smiling, and he started laughing. He says, "I promise you they won't fire you." And that was it. And he says, "What can I do for you?" And I made a kind of a sarcastic remark. I said, "Find me a good lawyer and a connection with the union."
And he made it happen.
And he made it happen. And sure enough, 2 states down the coast, I had union troubles, and I thought, well, let's see if this works. And I called, and they said, the boss said you'd be calling.
Oh my gosh.
And it was an hour later, the president of the union came into the catering area and just apologized profusely about the problems and that they would take care of it.
Wow.
But that was the only name of his kids I remember was Victoria Gotti, and she's kind of still in the limelight in her own little way, I guess. But that was my exposure to
Well, running with the East Coast.
That,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Now, I'm glad you brought up the Monkees. They're so underrated for me. I remember that 1980s resurgence because I was a young kid and I fell in love. I watched the TV show. I have to admit, and it's a little bit embarrassing, but I knew the Monkees before I knew the Beatles. I was raised in a really fundamental religious household. I didn't know rock and roll yet, but the Monkees somehow were safe.
Yeah.
And so the Monkees were my Beatles, man.
I watched the TV show and I watched Circus Boy
Oh yeah.
with Mickey. Mickey and I still stay in touch.
Oh, that's awesome. I was
But,
going to ask you if you had any friendships from that experience.
Like I say, Peter was my daughter's godfather,
Amazing.
and Davey was unofficially my son's godfather, but he just he had some issues in Florida, so he never got to come out too often. But they're a good bunch. I mean, one week they'd all be in one bus, the next week there'd be 4 buses out.
Brothers.
It's a long tour.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
I mean, one day you like the guy, and the next day you need a little space.
I know that, Joe.
But they always treated me well, and when I would go home, they made sure everything went well at home. And when I was ready to go back, they would fly me back.
Cool.
Amazing stories.
Love it.
Mr. Sinatra, his wife, was very much into fundraising, and when I was touring with Iglesias, of course, Julio had a psychological competition with Sinatra. Every venue we'd go into in Europe, he'd want to know what Sinatra did and what he did. Management would always inflate the numbers to make him happy. So they tried to get to him before I did.
Yeah.
You know. So anyway, Sinatra's wife called and asked if we would sing on one of the fundraisers. Of course, that was he jumped on that.
Yeah.
And when we all checked in my box in the check-in was a crisp $100 bill in Sharpie saying, "Thank you, Frank." So my crews and I went down to the ballroom, the crystal chandeliers everywhere, you know, and I met Sinatra's road manager, and he says, he just doesn't like anybody. Don't try to be friends with him. Just do what you got to do.
Got it.
And I said, fair enough. And he says, I'll give you an example. He said, one of the brass wanted time off to go to a funeral, and he said, you got the time, don't come back.
Oh.
So I thought, that's clear enough
Yeah,
for me.
yeah.
So I'm down there. When you're on the road, you try to, if this is good water, you try to figure out how you can score a case of water.
Right.
So everybody, the crews are up on stage setting up, and I'm sitting down on the ballroom floor.
Yeah.
And watching it set up, and one of the waiters comes by and sets this huge bottle of Jack Daniels on the stage. And he never came back. So I thought, well, if that's not there in an hour, it won't be there.
You're like,
So
my name is Jack.
Yeah, exactly. So an hour later, it's still there. And you kind of develop a rhythm. I shouldn't say everybody on the road has the rhythm I did, but you had to do something to stay awake and something to keep you going. I don't mean drugs, just something.
Yeah.
So it was about time to have a drink.
Yeah.
So I went over and I took the bottle. And about the third drink, I'm sitting there and I see out of the corner of my eye this huge guy comes over and he looks at me, and I don't know what his name was, but he introduced himself, and he said, "You like Jack Daniels?" And I said, "Yeah, it's great." He said, "My boss does too." And I said, "Who's that?" And he pointed off stage right, and here's Sinatra with an empty rock glass full of ice going.
No way.
Oh.
And he says, "Just be happy it's more than half full."
Nice.
And he took it, off he walked, and Frank poured himself a drink I looked over there and kind of grinned, held his glass up, and
Nice.
that was it. So that's the only
He had a
Sinatra.
drink with Sinatra.
Yeah.
Well,
At least a cheers from-
indirectly.
At least
cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A toast.
that's as much as I wanted after that.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Good deal.
so that's my only Sinatra story.
Cool. Well, it's been a great experience and a great conversation having you on the show. Thank you for being on the show.
I appreciate
Really
being asked.
I love, and a new friend here because I want to hear more of these stories for sure. But we'll have to get together later and
Well,
go grab
as
a beer or
soon as
something.
my lawyer tells me about the statute of limitations on some of the stories, I'll get back to you.
Sounds good.
Perfect. We'll take you up on it.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Wow, what a great conversation. I loved the stories. Everything about it, just the history of some of the things that he's experienced. And he's like nonchalant, are these interesting or not?
I know.
And they're like, dude, you met all these people and
He's too close to it. He's just
you had beers with, Lois Lane and Stevie Ray Vaughan and Willie Nelson.
I mean, he
and
lived next door to Ray Benson. He didn't know Ray Benson. You know what I mean? So I love also like sitting here across the table and looking at Jack and just being like, now this is old Austin, man.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like I have this thing about like people and places that were here before me because me being here from 2000, I start to feel like an old timer.
Right.
And then Jack makes me feel like
like a baby.
Yeah, I haven't been here long at all. So
you're looking at history,
right.
like you're
personified.
Exactly, right there. Thank you, Jack, for joining the show today and sharing so much of your experiences and just the brief, of the 40 years of history with us. You're listening to Dan Dillard and
Mark Strube,
the co-host of Vibe Austin, and this has been a Founding Media podcast made possible by our sponsors, Austin Title, Vista Lending, House of Strube, and Nest Financial. Once again, check out their services in our show notes.
But before you go, like we always like to do, we're going to do an unsponsored, shameless nonprofit plug for our, great city of Austin that is so much about the giving back. So for this episode, we wanted to call out again HAM, the nonprofit that supports Austin musicians in their health and including mental health. Check out their site and socials for more information about how you can get involved.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Vibe Austin. Until then, hasta la vista.